Um, and Yeah, this housing group was worked on a lot of different issues. And we had last year we worked really hard on a rent control campaign. You may have seen in the news, but we finally got um, the rent control levels sort of cut in half, how much they could raise your rent each year for rent controlled apartments in the city. That was like a big win. It hadn't been changed for 40 years. But since we finished that big campaign, we decided to start this year with a number of teach-ins about different issues, to get people caught up, to, help people learn more things. And then we're gonna, in a couple weeks, we're gonna meet up to sort of talk about what we're gonna work on this year. So this is hopefully you've enjoyed these teach-ins. If you've been to multiples of them, maybe this is your first one, but welcome. Our housing group normally meets Thursdays at 6, but we're doing this teach-in place of the normal housing meeting. And yeah, welcome. I'm glad you're here. In a minute, my colleagues will introduce themselves as we get to their portions of the teaching. Can we go on to the next slide? So if you don't know what LA Forward is, welcome. LA Forward is a community of people who fight for policies that make Los Angeles a fair, flourishing place for everyone. The way I like to explain it often is, we have this democracy, right? It's supposed to be, the people empowering their representatives to make decisions for all of us as a society. Uh, but that doesn't really work if the people, like if the lowest part of the pyramid who are empowering the representatives, if they don't have all the knowledge and tools they need, if the representatives are able to sort of hide things from them, or there's like a lack of education, there's a lack of accessibility to those politicians, then the system breaks down. It doesn't work the way it's supposed to. So we really pride ourselves on breaking down complex issues and explaining them and giving you the tools and the knowledge you need to hopefully inspire you to go out and change your city, your county, your state for the better. And so that's one of the things we're here to do today. Next slide. So what is our agenda going to look like tonight? Well, we're right now we're in the overview part. We're going to talk a little bit about all the stuff we're doing tonight. Then we're going to do a little icebreaker together. It's gonna be a little scary. I'm going to ask you to come off mute and talk with all of us and share your thoughts. You can also put them in the chat if you want. But Yeah, we're gonna do a little icebreaker, share, get to know each other a little bit. And then we're going to go into the bulk of our night is going to be social housing 101. Basically, explaining this concept of social housing, showing examples of it, talking about different forms it can take. And then we're going to do some Q&A and discussion time. And then at the end, we're going to talk sort of next steps, what's coming up next for our housing group and how you can get more involved. So for now, we're going to move on to this icebreaker. Um, so, housing isn't really supposed to cost more than 30% of your income. Hopefully, it's less than that. But we know in reality, for many of us, probably for the vast majority of people, your housing costs more than 30% of your income. Um, you know, uh, Trying to remember the numbers off the top of my head, but I remember there's different brackets. There's if it costs 90% of your income, 50% of your income, more than 30, less than 30. The less than 30 is the smallest chunk. Um, and the idea behind social housing is that you would be in a situation where hopefully your housing costs would be at less than 30% of your income and would you'd sort of be in a covenant that they would stay at 30% of your income the whole time, 30% or less. They couldn't be raised above that. So we'd love you to just sort of dream for a minute, right? Think big and think about what your life would be like. What might change for you? What would you be freed up to do if you had that money back? If your housing costs, your rent costs, whatever it is, would never be more than 30% of your income. Um, so yeah, Godfrey's saying in the chat, he was just on another Zoom earlier, and somebody's rent is 60% of their income. So imagine for that person if they got 30% of that back, what that would allow them to do. So I'd love for you to come off mute if you feel comfortable doing so, or put in the chat and just dream with me. What would your life, how would your life be different if your housing costs were lower? Say they were 25% or 20% of your income. And you knew they were gonna, you were able to plan ahead because you knew they were gonna stay that way for the next 10 or 20 years. Anybody feel like sharing? I'll start at least. I think we would travel a lot more. We're always either paying bills or fixing things, you know. And I think like if we had more money, we would be able to travel more. I know we have a long list of places we'd love to see. So that would be something for me that I would be more able to do with lower housing costs. Um, Somebody's saying they'd pay off their student loans. That's great. Somebody's saying they're
Lucy, I was
making
going to say
more
the same
art.
thing.
Yeah. Anybody want to come off and introduce themselves briefly and share?
If Henry's okay to share, you'd say be making more art. That'd be awesome. What kind of art do you make?
Oh, I do a lot. I like mixing music. I like painting. I like doing poetry. Um,
Hmm.
yeah, I come from an artistic family, so
Oh, we would all benefit from that, so that'd be
yeah,
awesome.
and yet somehow I ended up a lawyer, uh, which makes affording the rent easier, but it's not exactly the thing that, expands my soul, so to
Yeah.
speak.
It's like how many more of us could pursue like passions, aside from just our like 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Hmm.
If you've ever watched one of those, like if you're watching the Great British Baking Show, these people always have like six different hobbies. They're like, when I'm not baking, I like to garden. And when I'm not
Hmm.
gardening, I like to sculpt. And it's like, man, is that what it's like when you have like decent housing and healthcare? Like all taken care of?
You have
Uh,
hobbies.
yeah. Yeah, somebody else would say I would also pay off my loans and feel more at peace. See? So yeah,
Yeah,
if
sometimes
anyone
it's
else
like a
wants to
feeling you would
share,
have. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, think about just those feelings too. If you want to just put in a feeling word, how it would feel. Yeah, yeah, to yeah, to have that. Oh, interesting. There's no sales tax on rent. Torrance relies heavily on rent. Interesting.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Oh, so it would be basically the funds would be available to like reinvest back into communities.
yeah, yeah,
Hmm.
that's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way of looking
Yeah,
at it.
because
Yeah.
you think about it, if people weren't paying the money in rent and they were going out to restaurants or going to the movies, more they're
Hmm.
supporting, locally, that would be really change the whole city, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, just thank you for taking that moment to sort of dream with me and think about that. And now we're going to talk about one of the ways we can make housing more affordable and hopefully make those dreams come true for people. And then I pass it over to my colleague Tressa here to get us started.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, everyone. I'm Tressa Pope. I am a LA Forward member and a volunteer leader of the Housing Justice Working Group. And I am very interested in learning about social housing. When I joined LA Forward a few years ago, it's something I got an education with one of our coalitions that we're a part of, and so in putting this presentation together, I got to learn even more. So first, we'll start off with just the definition of social housing. It's a modern approach to living in California where homes are permanently affordable, and that's one of the big features of social housing, is that permanent affordability. It can be all different income levels, so it could be mixed income within the same housing dwelling, and it's governed by the residents that live there. All right, so I'm going to play a short video. This was put together by ACT LA, which is one of the coalitions that we partner with, and this will explain a little bit more about social housing. And if it may come off too loud, so you may want to adjust the volume on your computers if it does. So I apologize for that.
It might sound crazy, but I just want my rent to stay affordable
Can you hear it okay?
permanently. Our landlord told us our rent was increasing next month. Rent we can't afford.
Yeah. My landlord built out a rentable rooftop party deck when we just want our ceiling leaks fixed.
What I want is the chance to own the home I live in. Instead, I've been paying rent every month for all these years and have nothing to show for it. Life in LA, man.
Not to worry about student loans.
Wait. Come on, folks. Where do we turn in these situations? We know this group. Social housing. Yes, social housing means housing that is affordable forever in a community where we want to live and within our budget. Social housing is resident run, meaning we make decisions that are right for us, not whatever harebrained ideas they have to make a buck. And in some social housing buildings, residents have the opportunity to own their home by making payments they can afford. It's for renters of all income levels. And with social housing, our homes will never be sold, bought, or controlled by corporate landlords set on making a profit. So what do we say, group? Social housing is ours, affordable forever.
All right, so to recap what they had in the video, social housing is publicly or community owned. It's permanently affordable. So they said affordable forever and not on a fixed term. Mixed income communities, not necessarily having income limits, but different income levels could be within the community, and it's democratically governed by the residents. So we have talked about in our teach-ins about the words affordable housing. So although social housing can be a form of affordable housing, here are some of the differences between traditional affordable housing and social housing. So traditional affordable housing has a period of time where the affordability expires. So it could be 30 years, it could be 55 years, but social housing has affordability forever, in perpetuity. And traditional affordable housing is managed by private developers or corporate landlords, as they talked about in the video, whereas social housing is community or publicly owned. Traditional affordable housing may have certain income limits where you have to prove your income in order to live in that particular place, whereas in social housing, you could have different mixes of income. Traditional affordable housing, we're seeing corporate decisions, whereas social housing, tenant governance. And then traditional affordable housing, once those affordability terms expire, those limits expire, then the market can reclaim those units. They can go back to the general market, of course, then displacing residents that live in those affordable units, where social housing would be permanently affordable, so generations of families could still afford to live in that same community. So social housing, as talked about, stays affordable forever. It leverages current resources like public land, existing buildings, so we could build housing faster and for less. It gives community members a pathway to home ownership in some models. It's rooted in affordability, not profit. And so just like, I think it was Bill that was talking about putting that money back into the community, it's a way for community members to perhaps potentially have an opportunity to own their unit while still contributing to the community and having a say in the building's governance as well. All right, so in our past teach-ins, we've talked about the 3 P's of affordable housing, which are production, protection, and preservation. So you can either raise your hand or take yourself off mute, or you can put it in the chat, but which of the 3 P's, if we're exploring this social housing, which of the 3 P's do you think that we're talking about in looking at social housing? Would it be production, protection, or preservation? Does anybody have any ideas about that or want to put it in the chat? It's a little bit of a trick question.
I feel like it's all 3.
I feel like it's all 3 too. Yeah. What might you say is like pick one of the 3 P's and how would social The fourth is P for Peter. Yes. So how would you say that social housing, either protects, produces, or preserves affordable housing?
Oh, I guess that's still on me. Well, production is that it's forever.
Right. Yeah. So it's protecting that affordability. Yeah. Anyone can chime in. What's one thing we haven't talked about, which I'll go a little bit into, is preservation. If land is publicly owned, or if we have dwellings, we have properties that can already be converted to social housing, then it preserves it, and it's not up for grabs, for like corporate developers or corporate landlords. So it's preserving affordability in those places where the community already owns land or already owns the property. Yeah, and then we have the opportunity now to produce social housing. So Jason's going to talk a little bit about the funding, but we now have funds allocated for social housing. So we could use those funds to produce properties that look like this. We could produce these kinds of models. All right, so here's some differences between tenant governance and corporate management. So corporate management, of course, is profit over people. They normally have profit-driven decisions, whereas tenants, it's community-driven decisions. Tenants have no say under corporate management, whereas residents shape the policies of the building for tenant governance. Maintenance is often neglected when it comes to corporate management. I'm sure we can all raise our hands on something that's happened to us where corporate management wasn't necessarily acting quickly enough or respecting our need to have something maintained. Whereas in tenant governance, it's community run, community governed, so maintenance is a priority. Rent increases are to maximize returns, are to maximize profit, whereas affordability is protected under tenant governance. And then corporate management, of course, the concerns are, or the priority is market rate rents, whereas in tenant governance, under the social housing model, low-income households can also be subsidized. So there's mixed levels of income, but also our low-income residents would be able to get perhaps additional support. Tenants, developers, and property managers have access to an ecosystem that helps to train in co-governance and co-ownership. So there are resources for that. And like the video said, there are opportunities for tenants to even purchase their unit in the future to build equity and build legacy for their families. In social housing models, public land, existing buildings, those one of the things I talked about in terms of preservation. And it is also a more cost-effective way of producing housing because we are using already land that is designated for the community. It eliminates those land acquisition costs. Those are one of the barriers with building affordable housing is acquiring land. So if land is already designated as community land, we can produce faster, we can build faster. It protects housing from those corporate investors, those land grabbers, forever, because we have a model in place that's protecting it forever. And the land then belongs to the community and not to investors. So it's not there for investors to flip properties or build luxury housing. It is designated for the community. There is a resource that I was able to get a hold of. It's a Community Land Trust 101, and that might be a future teach-in for us because as LA Forward housing justice nerds, we are still in the beginning stages of learning all the details about community land trusts, but that is one way to build social housing is on community land trusts. So I can share that link with you. Yes, you may hear community land trusts. The abbreviation could be CLT. You might hear that in some of the affordable housing spaces. But this is about an hour watch if you're interested in that 101. It's on YouTube. So here's the definition of that community land trust, or CLT. It is a community-controlled nonprofit, and their sole purpose is to keep the land for the community and for community purposes. And so it is removed from the, regular real estate market where investors could then use that land for their own profit and purposes. Community land trust is for the sole purpose of the community. So social housing could be built on a community land trust because it would support that type of model. And all right, so another interaction with the group. So you can either take yourself off mute and share, or you can put this in the chat. But as you can imagine, in talking about social housing in certain spaces, it might be threatening to some people. So let's think of some ways this might disrupt the status quo. When we're talking about social housing, who might perceive that they're losing power, or who's gaining power? And why might this be threatening to certain groups of people? So who do you think would be threatened by social housing? Landlords won't like it. Sure. Yep. You're absolutely right. Developers lose power. Tenants gain power. Love it. Yep. That's right. Anybody else? Any other ideas or thoughts? And folks, yeah, why do you think that landlords wouldn't like it? Or why disrupts the entire system? Yeah. What happens when tenants gain power? Like what does that do? What do you think? I mean, is that good, bad?
Makes it harder for them to make money.
Oh no.
I know.
Makes it harder. But does it make it perhaps easier for tenants to have more money?
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. Okay.
I would think so.
Yeah.
It's also more housing for people who can't afford the private market means fewer tenants who are competing in the private market, means less competition for private market rate housing, which means not as much rent.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. Any other thoughts or feelings about how social housing might break apart the world? Well, that leads me into some of the challenges of social housing. So some of the challenges are, number one, people don't even really know what it is. They've already made up their mind, especially when I talk to people about social housing, they have already made up their mind of what it is before I even explain to them what it is. So people are just unfamiliar with it, especially if they hear the word social housing, they think socialist housing, they're very nervous about that. They don't understand and just think it's a bad thing all around. So it's one of the challenges is helping to define and helping to explain to people what it is. Also, there's a lot of resistance to permanency because, like you brought up, these are properties that are not going to be on the market anymore. They are permanently affordable. So they won't have that expiration date where now they can go back onto the market. After that expiration date of affordability, they are permanently affordable. That causes a lot of challenges in people's minds. And then, of course, we talked about the power dynamics. Corporate landlords, corporate developers are going to have resistance there. The real estate industry is going to have resistance. Also, corporate banks would also have some resistance when it comes to social housing. So those are some of the power dynamics that create friction in trying to implement something like this. And then implementation. So putting it actually into live action, those are some of the challenges. We can certainly have the funding, but then to execute, there's still a lot of, friction there and a lot of challenge. So will it work? Will social housing actually work? It sounds great in theory. It looks great in a cartoon, but is it something that could actually work? Well, it has proven to work already around the world. There are countries and cities where tenants are seeing the benefits of social housing. The communities are seeing benefits of social housing. It's becoming a safer, stable place where families can actually flourish. So I have some examples here of some places around the world. Here's a picture of examples of social housing. You can see here that there's even some green space up on the roof of one of the developments here. Vienna is talked about a lot in the social housing space, and Los Angeles actually sent a delegation to Vienna to view social housing, to look at it. The LA City Mayor went to Vienna. Some of the board supervisors went. Some of the members of the Los Angeles County Affordable Housing Services Agency, they went to Vienna. And when they came back, a lot of people were excited. Some people were actually unsure how it could be implemented. So yes, and some council members went as well. So there was a delegation of people from the Los Angeles area, city and county, that went to Vienna to view how it is. And these are some of their approaches to that. You know, they believe that housing is a human right. They govern with the intention of providing housing for all in some respect. They prioritize the working class, and you know, it creates like I said, a stable, safer place for all of their residents by putting housing as a priority. These are some of their hallmarks. So I like the idea of social mixing, where there are different socioeconomic groups within the same building, as well as different professions. We talked about just on our call here, people that may be an attorney, but also are an artist. And so having people of different backgrounds, different professions all together, you know, creates just a more beautiful, thriving space. So these are some other areas that have some other locations throughout the world, and even US. Maryland has their social housing developed now in Montgomery County. We also have, there are other places in the works, I think in the US besides California, but New York, Hawaii, Seattle as well have social housing either on the way or they are in development. So it is something that places are exploring around the world, around the globe. So that's very exciting. Okay, so like I said, yes, it is on the way. It is possible. We've passed Measure ULA in November 2022, and so Jason will talk a little bit about that, as well as Measure A. So Measure ULA was specifically for the city of Los Angeles, and then Measure A has funding that can be allocated for social housing, and that is a county-wide fund. All right, so who's leading this work? Well, our Housing Justice Working Group works on social housing, and we get our education from some of the other groups that we align with. So here's a few. ACT LA is really where we've gotten a lot of our education when it comes to social housing. They've done teach-ins for us or with us. And then some of the other organizations that we see with us on the front lines down at City Hall when we're making public comment, and so many more other community organizations are doing the hard work of advocating for social housing here in our community. So one last exercise, if you could indulge me, is what do you think, for you even personally or someone that you know, what could it look like if you were living in a social housing space here in Los Angeles? You know, for me, some of the things that we talked about in Vienna of just really building community and having a stable place where people can all thrive together. But what are some things that come to mind when you think of social housing? Does anyone want to share?
I think sometimes of being able to like decide as a community, like we want solar panels on our building, or we want all you know, like heat pump window AC units, something like that. Like things that make the building more green, and like you wouldn't have to go through a landlord or something like that. The group together could have decided we're going to invest in this together to make the building more green, you know, with some of the money we're saving because our rent isn't crazy high, you know, that sort of stuff.
Well, yeah, and I like some of the comments we're seeing, you know, fewer cars needed, economic diversity within the building, communal gathering. Tens yesterday shared they wanted a community garden. Yes, community garden. There is, I know a housing developer in, I think it's the Minneapolis area, that was working on a space with different socioeconomic groups, but on the bottom floor, they actually had childcare so that families didn't have to worry about when their children got home from school, they could get fed and have place to do their homework before they even got home from work, before the parents. And so I think spaces like that would just really be a great place to grow up in as a child, to be exposed to people of different backgrounds, different different long-term stability, not having to move frequently. Yes, pride of home ownership and community. Imagine being able to pass on housing to others in your family too. Yeah. Here are just some testimonials of some people, that are currently living in a CLT, Community Land Trust environment, where I love this statement: rent is no longer rent, it's a carrying charge. So thinking of it that way, as a charge of caring for communal space. We want a fire pit in the middle of the lawn or an avocado tree. We're not asking a landlord, we're asking ourselves. So those are some of the visions of what a social housing could look like. So now we're going to talk about, well, how are we going to pay for it? And Jason will share with us about that.
Yeah. So like Tressa said earlier, two ways that the city and the county are looking about going through with this are we in 2024 at the county level, voters voted to do what's called Measure A, which was the sales tax. I was trying to remember exactly what kind of tax it was, but it's like a quarter of a cent or something like that. It's very, very small amount, and it builds up. Like, remember that scene in, what was it, Superman 3, where they're shaving fractions of a penny off of every transaction, and then he wakes up the next morning and he's got like $10 million because it's like fractions of, all these fractions for all these transactions. It's like that. If we take just a little bit of a penny every time somebody makes a purchase, that adds up. So there's a lot of purchases made across the county of LA every day, right? And then we take that fund and we're going to use it to, Measure A is going to be able to build affordable housing. It's going to create like new services, new homeless services. It's going to be used for a bunch of different stuff. And then at the city level, we also recently passed something called Measure ULA. Measure ULA works a little differently in that Measure ULA doesn't tax all of us every time we make a purchase or something like that. Instead, it's basically when you sell a property that's over $5 million, they take a chunk of that and they throw it into a fund, right? So they do a 3% tax on a sale of something over $5 million. It was described in the news and some of the time as a mansion tax. The idea of like these big mansions would be sold, and we would take a little bit of that and throw it in. And the idea is that would raise money that then Measure ULA is specifically going to be for affordable housing. A lot of other funding programs, a lot of stuff tries to split the money up for a lot of different things. Measure ULA is meant to build affordable housing, right? It's like a dedicated fund, right? So when you hear like the city say like, oh, we have to cut the budget for this, we have to cut the budget for this. This is a dedicated fund. These funds are set aside and locked just aside for this thing, just to create affordable housing. And the other thing Measure ULA does, which is really cool, is it funds tenant protections. So recently in the last couple of years, we got it passed that now if you're facing eviction court, you can get a lawyer provided to you that's like similarly to if you're facing criminal defense and you can't afford a lawyer. Now you can get a lawyer to help you go through eviction court. And these are paid for by Measure ULA. And that's really important because they found that like people often lose their cases because they don't have a lawyer or they don't speak the language. They need someone to help advocate for them in court. But going back to that idea of building affordable housing, Measure ULA is taxing these sales of these big properties, and it's putting that money aside to pay for things like social housing. It's actually put into the bill that is to the measure that a certain percentage of it a certain amount of it is supposed to go to building social housing, which is really cool. However, there are some concerns about Measure ULA, which we're going to talk about, that are important to talk about. And I want to break these up into a few chunks. One thing is there's a group of people who just don't want it to exist at all, right? They don't want big, expensive properties taxed at all. They don't like any sort of thing that taxes the wealthy, right? And there's a group of people led by this organization called the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, I believe. And they have actually gotten the signatures to put on the ballot for the fall a measure that it doesn't directly say Measure ULA, but what it does, it says these kinds of taxes can only be passed with a supermajority. So it's not 50% plus one. It would need a higher threshold. And it would repeal previous ballot measures that hadn't met that threshold. And they specifically did it that way because Measure ULA got 58% of the vote. And so it wouldn't have hit that threshold, right? But then there's another effort to try to combat that, which is called ACA 13. It's another measure that's going up on the ballot this year. I believe I have a slide about this, if you can go forward. Yeah, so ACA 13 is a separate ballot measure that is designed to protect these kinds of things by saying that if you want to pass this ballot measure that's going to set it to a supermajority, that ballot measure also has to be passed with a supermajority. So it would kind of negate the attack on Measure ULA. So that's one thing that's going on. There are people who basically don't want these kinds of taxes to exist at all. They're trying to override it with a ballot measure. Even though Measure ULA was passed with a very popular ballot measure, they're trying to override it with another ballot measure. There's also like what I would call like the good faith argument. Like if that's the bad faith argument, these people just don't want it to exist at all. There's also a good faith argument that people are making about Measure ULA, which is the idea that it was sold to us as a mansion tax, right? It's just supposed to be on these big mansions that are sold. But it's also hitting like some multifamily apartment buildings that are over the $5 million threshold and taxing those as well. And there's a belief by some people that that's discouraging people from building new housing because sometimes there are companies or organizations or banks that fund housing and with the idea that someone's going to build it and then the person who built it's going to sell it off to someone else to manage it, to another company or entity to manage it, and they would immediately get charged that tax. And so there's been some proposals by council members and there's been some talk about trying to alter Measure ULA to either remove the multifamily apartments or to put like a cap, like say in the first 15 years of something being built, it can't be taxed. There's different proposals out there, but I would say that's more of a good faith argument where people are saying, hey, Measure ULA is a good idea. We don't want it to go away, but we want to tweak it because it's not quite working the way we think, or it's overtaxing some things we don't want to be taxed. So just so you know, like there is funding being produced for this kind of social housing out there. Measure ULA and Measure A are different ways that are being funded. However, there is the opportunity, there's possibility Measure ULA might be taken away if this ballot measure passes. There's also a possibility in the future that people may try to pass another kind of ballot measure to tweak it in certain ways. So just be aware that that's out there. You might hear on like the news driving home one day talk about Measure ULA, you know, and ballot measures and things like that. You just know that like we're trying to create what we think are equitable ways to fund this sort of social housing. And there's also always a lot of challenges, a lot of people trying to undo what we create. And some of those are good faith efforts, some of those are not. So yeah, so like I said, 70% of the Measure ULA funds are set aside for affordable housing. This can be used to create,
Yes, there is. I'll get
Go
into
ahead,
that in a
Godfrey.
little bit. I'll
Yeah,
answer it
Godfrey's
really
gonna go into
quickly.
that.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So
question
Measure
chat, yeah. Go ahead.
Measure ULA is like 56 pages of policy. And so a percentage of ULA funds goes to something called alternative models, of housing under which social housing is a version of an alternative model. So that's a short answer, and we can get you more.
And yeah, so that's just a little bit more about Measure ULA, about how we're trying to fund these, how we're trying to make them a reality. And yeah, I think next I'm passing it over to Godfrey.
Oh, is it me? Great. Thanks, Jason. Hi, everybody. My name is Godfrey Plata. My pronouns are he, him, his. I jumped in as the deputy director of LA Forward Institute, where I support all of our organizing and programming across LA City and LA County. We support folks' desires to figure out how they want to improve their community, and housing is just one of those things. If you go to the next slide, Tressa. Thanks so much. As basically in this conversation, Tressa has really set up really well a little bit of a basic understanding of social housing, how it fits into housing solutions. Jason has shared a little bit about how different measures have tried to fund social housing, because without the funding, you can't have it. Like that, you do actually need a funding stream for it. And so here are some active conversations around social housing. I'm a PhD dropout. And one of the reasons I dropped out of a PhD program is because I learned that if you are doing research as a doctorate in the academy, the goal is to sort of find the edge of a conversation and contribute to it, to things that like knowledge has not yet created. And so what I'm presenting to you is sort of the edge of the conversation about social housing here in Los Angeles County. And these are just a few of the active conversations happening. There's probably more I'm not presenting here. The first is this question of, do we have enough funding? And Jason presented primarily an LA City specific proposition called ULA, which we passed. And ULA offers some funding, as Kathy asked about, for alternative models of housing, including social housing. But this doesn't mean that there's necessarily that same that same pot of funding for alternative models of housing in other places. Measure A, of course, offers funding to be distributed at the county level and through this agency called La Casa, Affordable Housing Solutions Agency, LA Affordable Housing Solutions Agency, whatever, La Casa. But the question remains, like, this is still a finite amount of funding. Do we have enough funding? And especially if ULA is threatened, as Jason mentioned, that funding could go away for alternative models as well, as little as it is. So do we have enough funding is both like a question of ULA, but also an entire county question, depending on where you live and what revenues you have access to. This is like an opportunity for advocacy if you're interested in this kind of thing, depending on where you are. The second bullet point, is that funding being used towards social housing? So fun fact, Measure ULA, again, was written to be able to deliver funding toward alternative models like social housing. In the most recent distribution of Measure ULA funds to developers, the system that LAHD, the housing department, devised to be able to distribute the money did not award funding to social housing projects. So even though the policy was written such that they could give money to social housing, they weren't giving money to social housing development. So there's this question of, does anything need to change about the rubric? What is LAHD's interpretation of the rubric? There are questions around, even if you're devising policies to distribute funding for social housing, how do you ensure that that is actually even happening in the first place? So is it being used towards social housing is a different area for advocacy that you all might be interested in. The third bullet point, are we allowed to approve social housing? So Metro, our regional transportation agency, right? Like if you ride the Metro, either like buses or trains, et cetera, they've actually committed to 10,000 units of affordable housing at 20 different stations across the county, not just LA City, but across the county. So down in Artesia, for example, down for folks south of Los Angeles City. In conversations with Metro 10K, what they do is they solicit developer proposals for each different station. And in meeting with them last year, they were wondering, like, we're not even sure if we're allowed to approve projects that are proposed that propose permanent affordability. For them, this idea of permanent affordability, not affordability that expires after 30 years, 55 years, 99 years, like the idea of permanent felt illegal to them. They're like, I don't think we're allowed to approve permanent affordability. So even if there was funding there, proposals there, and the possibility of approving, some agencies have paused at the thought of even allowing projects to continue that sounded like social housing. So that's a body of work in and of itself. Tressa mentioned that community land trusts are potentially an entity and community that can support the creation of community ownership bodies that could buy up land for community, right? That would otherwise potentially go to private property owners. And so what we know is true is that there are some areas of the county for which CLTs do not yet exist. And it may be true that some of you all could be interested in exploring what it would be like to create this kind of community land trust entity where you live so that you would have a leg up in creating social housing in your community. So that's a body of work, again, in and of itself, that could be interesting to folks. And then lastly, again, an offering in terms of ways to move forward at the bottom here. People need to know about this possibility. Like, people's minds are blown when they imagine a world where tenants govern their own property and potentially, as renters, could eventually buy stake into the property that they live in. Boom! It's like a new complete thought, right? Or even the idea that like affordable housing is a thing across income levels, that there's like different levels of affordability, that people could live together like that. And that it could be permanently affordable, meaning that if I left my unit, that the next person to arrive wouldn't just have market value housing at a high rent rate, right? Like that it could be permanently affordable, that particular unit. Mind blown. And so if people don't know about this idea, they're not going to ask for it. They're not going to pitch proposals for it. They're not going to create laws that support it, et cetera. And so that educational piece is also something countywide in particular, and cities outside of LA City, where the conversation is not necessarily happening quite yet. So these are just 5 of the active conversations happening around social housing that are barriers to us making it happen. But it is literally, there's so much policy already out there and so much funding that is literally putting social housing right at the horizon of possibility. If you go to the next slide, Tressa. And so here at LA Forward, if you look at the very top of this particular slide, what we are doing is on March 19th, we invite you to come back to not this particular Zoom. It's a different Zoom link. We invite you to come back to Zoom with us 2 Thursdays from now to help us decide where we should take our advocacy. We are a group that wants to make sure that our community is helping to point us in the direction of their energy and of their interests. And if social housing, any of those barriers that I just presented to you are of interest to you, we invite you to come back on March 19th from 6 to 7 p.m. But if social housing is not your jam, but rent control is, SB 79, housing on transit is, if you're thinking about just any other forms of affordable housing fights that you're interested in, we are interested in figuring out where the energy of our community is. If you want to sign up for the Zoom that Jason put to the chat box on Thursday, March 19th, you can help voice the direction of our work. We also do many other things at LA Forward that aren't necessarily directly rooted in housing justice work. You just see a selection of those on your screen. If you go to laforward.org/calendar, you can sort of go through our calendar and sign up for what makes sense for you. But some somewhat housing related things on here include, you see there's a teach-in for this thing called the overpaid CEO taxes in LA City, specific attempt at a ballot initiative. Our friends at Lane, which organizes workers all over the city and county, want to tax companies of a certain size whose CEOs make 50 times more than the median income of their workers. And the money, part of it would go toward housing for what's called 50% to 100% AMI types of buildings. Is a very specific part of affordable housing. And then, of course, you see many other events here that just might be of interest to you. If you want to kind of shop around at LA Forward, we have a monthly meeting happening next Tuesday, the 10th at 7 p.m. And at that monthly meeting, you'll hear from all of the different groups that do organizing work here. Of course, none of this work is possible if we aren't supported by members who start monthly dues with us. You can be an official member of LA Forward for $1 a month or more. And that means that we get to bring you together in different regional gatherings, issue gatherings, feed you, all of that stuff. And that's where your money goes. I think there's one more, maybe, slide before we go to Q&A for the last 5 minutes. If you're on this call and you live in the San Gabriel Valley or know people who live in the San Gabriel Valley, so the San Gabriel Valley is sort of east of downtown LA, northeast of downtown LA, if you think of like Pasadena, South Pasadena, all the way to Pomona, that part of LA County is 30 plus cities in the shadow, often of LA City. And while our work in the South Bay is starting to pick up, which is really exciting, I see some South Bay folks on this call, our SGV work is just beginning again for 2026. And so if you are in the San Gabriel Valley or have friends in the San Gabriel Valley, we are actually working in coalition with other SGV organizations to put out this survey. And our goal is to get 100 SGV residents to fill this out, so we have a sense of what types of issues matter the most to folks in the SGV. So pass it on if you're interested. It's tinyurl.com/LAF-SGV-survey. Those are all the things that you can do sort of to move forward from this call. Lots of social housing, possible points of advocacy, lots of ways to learn at LA Forward, and lots of ways to tell us where to go with our work. Jason.
I want to plug one last thing, and then we can answer some questions. It is an election year. We have endorsed a bunch of candidates so far. There are more endorsement meetings coming up. And candidates really need help with canvassing. Canvassing is going door to door, knocking, talking to neighbors. And canvassing is really important to campaigns and also can be very intimidating. So we're launching a Canvas Club, which is going to be, we're going to do 2 weekends of training, teaching you about all the issues and the candidates and how to canvass. Then we're going to do 6 weeks, like 6 Saturdays or Sundays of canvassing for different candidates. And after each of those canvases, we're going to go out and grab a bite to eat and talk and hang out together. If this is something that interests you, if you want to challenge yourself to level up and get more involved politically in getting progressives elected to office, you can check out laforward.org/canvas and sign up for the Canvas Club. It's going to be a lot of fun, and it's a totally free program. You're going to learn a bunch of cool stuff and and help out candidates. So there's a link for that.
Thanks, Jason.
Cool.
We're going to stop recording just in case people have Q&A.
Yeah. Did you?